Actually, this notion of distinction between acts and omissions as acts is something I think about a lot because I work in aerospace and I build quality systems for a living. So when I'm being audited and I know someone isn't compliant in their area, I don't blurt it out to the auditor. I also don't mislead the auditor. I sort of wait for him to suss out the issue, and if he doesn't, I try not to blame myself. I do what I can to manage the processes in every area from a quality standpoint, and after years of doing the job, I learned not to hold myself responsible for the lack of dedication of other people. But the fact remains my omission supports poor behavior, and I walk away with a guilty conscience. You can't escape it. If you have the power to intervene and you don't, you're implicated in some way. Whether you do or you don't, time passes and consequences happen. It's a train that keeps going. In philosophy, particularly in ethics and moral philosophy, the distinction between acts and omissions is a significant one. How does a reductionist view of only outcomes create skewed views of culpability? How does a review of contingent relations color the truth in the search for justice and fairness? Ethical theories and the acts-omissions distinction. Consequentialism. Consequentialist theories such as utilitarianism evaluate actions based on their outcomes. In this framework, the distinction between acts and omissions might not be as significant because both can lead to consequences that affect overall utility or well-being. Basically, things are a lot easier if you just ignore intent. But then you end up with a lot of belligerent reductionist blame assignments that go against ethical intuition. Deontology. Deontological theories focus on the adherence to moral rules or duties. In this context, the distinction between acts and omissions can be more pronounced because duties often specify actions one must take or avoid. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, inspired by Aristotle, emphasizes the character and intentions of the moral agent rather than specific actions or omissions. Here, the focus is on developing virtuous traits such as courage and compassion, which guide one's behavior in various situations. Problems and using outcomes only to weigh ethical culpability. We certainly can't have sound ethical conclusions without some consequential review. That may be a review of probabilities based on past experience. It may be a study of history in the larger sense, or the history of the individual. First, we study the likely scenarios. Then we design a path that leads us to the best outcomes. What is the best outcome? Basic utility. Of course, contingencies have to be evaluated for long-term and short-term outcomes. A decision that may save lives now may lead to more lives lost later. All paths being short-term and long-term have to be evaluated. Sometimes paths emerge, and other times there's only bad options. There are not always good paths to take. That's the hard truth about reality. That's a strong indicator that you are part of an objective reality outside yourself. Consequential evaluation fills in a large part of the information we need to sculpt the right goals and decision making. If it's the only method of evaluation for ethical culpability, it can lead to blaming innocent bystanders for destructive contingencies they had no hand in creating. Here's the scenario. Person A swam out into the ocean and is struggling against the riptide. He hasn't got enough strength to swim back. Person B spots Person A, but is not sure he can make it out and back safely. Objectively speaking, he has the strength but not the confidence. Person A drowns. Is Person B culpable because he had the physical strength to save Person A's life? If we look at it simply from a perspective of outcomes, Person A would have lived had Person B swam out and pulled them back. Therefore, Person B is liable because he could have prevented it. This is a radical reductionism of the intent and the contingency that led to the situation. Is it true Person A's death could have been prevented by Person B? Yes, that has to be dealt with. There's no explaining that contingency away. But as far as moral culpability, there's a lot to say about the allocation of blame in a situation like this. Was the riptide flagged? Did Person A ignore the flag? This makes a difference because ignoring a red flag means the agent assumed the risk themselves. If it wasn't flagged, then we have to talk about ignorance of the agent. Perhaps the agent wasn't experienced enough to spot a riptide. Are we culpable for our ignorance? That's a deep philosophical question. Certainly, person B who decides not to save person A is not culpable for person A's potential ignorance if we can't even decide if person A is culpable. So right there we see arrogance and ignorance of person A should direct our applicability of culpability away from person B. When we review intent and history, we move away from a purely outcome-oriented position of blaming person B for not saving person A by following the destructive paths of contingency, not just the outcome. Person B underestimated their own strength. And this character incongruence, through unlikely potential contingency, added to the situation where person B allowed person A to drown. If person A arrogantly ignored the red flag, assumed the risk themselves, and person B's lack of confidence kept them from saving person A, even though they were physically capable of doing so, do we blame person B? No, because arrogantly avoiding a warning, you assume the risk. Nobody should feel the need to put their life on the line to save you. Let's assume the riptide wasn't visible or flagged, and person A knows what a riptide looks like and is normally conservative about where they swim. They were just unlucky this one time. Person B, again, while physically capable, doesn't have the confidence. Is person B culpable now? I think most of us would say no. Because in the end, nobody should be compelled necessarily to risk their own lives to save another. When they do it, they're heroes. We understand unconsciously to treat people as heroes like soldiers. The point being, person B is not morally culpable in any situation where intent and contingency are considered. As a matter of justice, nobody can expect a person to risk their own life for another. That's why we treat those as heroes who do. But we are wrong to treat those as cowards who don't. We can see when we look at the details, there's really no blame that's just to allocate to person B. But if we only look at the outcome, guess what? Person B is a murderer. That's a striking difference, and it's everything when it comes to the destructive nature of reductionism and the truth about objectively founded ethics. When I sit down and I run these scenarios in my mind, they just become totally absurd and complicated. These situations can become as complex as you have time to try to figure out the minutiae of the possibilities. The safest conclusion is this. While we seemingly can never know exactly what should be done in such a way that easy axiomatic principles can be constructed and reinforced, giving us desirable outcomes every time, it's also not fair to say that nothing can be known and there's no need to try to evaluate consequences or formulate functional axioms. If we don't try at all, we end up with raw power conflicts, opportunism, psychopathy. If we're persistent and we try to work things out, we do find some basic categories. We do gain some traction. We can't ignore that. And that's why relativism is a scourge. Of course, evaluation of outcomes is necessary, but not everything can ride solely on outcomes alone, because then not stopping a person from drowning is the same as drowning the person yourself. Nobody believes that. But why? Original intent. Nothing's ever going to change the fact that the other person is a victim of their own circumstances, whether that be bad decisions, bad luck, and nobody truly believes that any individual has an obligation to risk their own lives for somebody else. That is why people who do are considered heroes, but those that don't should not be considered cowards. Remember that. If you guys like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We've got some new subscribers. Welcome in, guys.